So, Rainy, you want to help me make this video today? Hey, 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 hey. Hey, you want to help? That's Rainy for, no, I'm going to sit here and itch my head and then chew on my own foot. Whatever. You love the dog. This is going to be my review of Pixar's Ratatouille, which came out in 2007. And this is actually, so my dad and I watched this, and it's been a long time since we watched Ratatouille. It's not that we don't like it. It's just been a long time since we've watched it. So it's just like, we remember the overarching plot of the story, but then it's just like, oh yeah, there's this that happens, and then there's this, and then there's that little bit, and then there's this detail. So it's like, you remember the overarching part of it, but then it's just like, oh yeah, there's all these little miscellaneous bits that I forgot about. So yeah, it's fun to watch the movie again. So I was trying to figure out something else, but I was just like, well, I technically have some chefs represented in this room, and the fact that we have, Charmy is on the Black Clover poster. She's up here. And then I have Sanji, who is right over here. There. On the One Piece poster. So I've got chefs represented. And then, of course, if we want to go down the My Hero Academia route, we, of course, have, Sato, Sugarman, Sugar Rush. And, if we're, Pokemon route, of course, we have to go with Brock. Because he is the standard for Pokemon chefs. In regards to Ratatouille, so as I said, the movie came out in 2007, and it is, of course, the story of this rat named Remy that lives in the French countryside with his brother Emile and his father Django. Well, it's spelled Django. So I think it's Django, because I keep going back to the Django Unchained movie, and I'm like, it's spelled the same, I think, but I don't think the father's name is ever said. And Remy is gifted with this very strong sense of smell and taste. So initially he's like, very interested in food and everything like that, and he ends up getting turned into kind of the poison testers, and like he's supposed to sniff the food to see if it has, rat poison on it, because the old lady that lives in this house keeps trying to poison the rats. And Remy, of course, has the habit of like sneaking into the house, and he ends up watching this show that's about Auguste Gusteau, and he is this like world famous chef. And so I think he's supposed to be like on the level of like the television chef, like in the line of like, Emeril Lagasse and, all these other, amazing chefs and everything that, loves cooking and loves to teach people how to cook. And he thinks, anyone can cook, and everything like that. And Remy is just fascinated by this man and, all this other fun stuff. And what happens is Remy, of course, really decides that he really wants to try cooking, and him and his brother end up doing some experiments. His father and Remy and his father do not really get along that well. I mean, he loves his father and his father loves him, but there's also this whole thing of, how are we going to, Remy very much is interested in like cooking and different things like that, and like his father just does not see the point in that. Which, I mean, the rats are kind of a, you have to eat to survive type of thing. And Remy is kind of going down the line of like, I don't want to eat to survive. I want to eat because I want to know what these flavors taste like so I can live through the food that I am eating, enjoy the food that I'm eating. And he goes through this whole thing, and of course, what ends up happening is him and his brother end up attempting to cook, which results in them getting electrocuted at one point, which is kind of funny. And then, hi. And he's like, I has bed. I is be cute. I is not quite on camera. If you scoot back that way, you'll be on camera. And he's like, nope, I'm good. Okay. And, you know, they try to cook the food and, it doesn't go well, but they end up actually inside the house and the woman ends up seeing them. And the old woman's basic answer is, shoot everything that I see. And I'm like, bullets trying to kill a rat, even 2 rats, seems a bit over dramatic in my opinion. And I know that they're heightening it for the movie, but it does not make sense in my opinion. I'm like, you've put out rat poison, I get that, but I don't think a gun is really going to help you get a rat. They're very fast. My dad and I have dealt with like having mice in our house before, and they're fast. Yes, we trap them, but it's just like small works better against mice. Big guns against rats do not work well. And she ends up actually, shooting down like part of her ceiling and finding like the rat colony that's in her attic. And this, of course, results in all the rats having to flee. And during this time frame, Remy becomes separated from his clan, from his family. And he actually ended up hitching a ride on this book that's called Anyone Can Cook by Gusteau. And he ends up being like his little platform that he uses to like, kind of surf his way through like the sewer system. And he ends up kind of stranded. And we have this moment where he's just like waiting and waiting and waiting for like any sign of his father, of his brother, of anybody else, any sound. And nothing comes. He doesn't hear anything. And what ends up happening is, as he's like looking through the book, he's like reading the book because Remy can read. And he's like reading through the book, and I guess it's applied Dory logic to it. Somehow he learned how to read. And he is looking over all the pages, and then one of the pages that has like this, picture of Gusteau on it kind of comes to life and starts talking to him. And I love the fact that Remy is immediately of the whole mind of like, well, I've lost it. I'm talking to an illustration. It's a figment of my imagination. And I like that long running joke in the movie of just like, you're a figment of my imagination. Why are you talking to me? Type of thing. And like Gusteau starts like, encouraging him to go up and like look around. And Remy does. He climbs his way out of the sewer system, and he like climbs his way through, apartment buildings or whatever. And we see different scenes in the apartment buildings. And he ends up climbing his way all the way to the roof. And he looks out and he realizes that he's in Paris because he sees the Eiffel Tower and he sees these beautiful lights of Paris. I, for one, would very much want to go to Paris at some point in time. I want to go see the Louvre. I want to go see the Eiffel Tower. I want to go see Versailles. There's a bunch of things that I want to see when I go to, at some point in time whenever I go to Paris. I want to go see Notre Dame. A bunch of places I want to go. And I actually, when I'm sitting here, thinking about this movie, I'm like, I did remember that I wanted to do that, like, Disney trivia, or not trivia, but, Disney World Tour type thing, like real life locations that have been in Disney movies. And I still want to do that. I just haven't gotten to it yet because it's just like multiple Disney movies have taken place in Paris. Because like we have Hunchback of Notre Dame, of course, it takes place in Paris. We have the Aristocats that takes place in Paris. And then now we have Ratatouille that takes place in Paris. Yes, I know Ratatouille is Pixar, but Pixar at this point in time is, Disney owned. They're an extension of Disney. They're still kind of their own little division, but they're still part of Disney. So I still kind of put that in there. I was like, well, that's part of it. So there's like lots of things have happened in Paris and like Disney timeline stuff. Remy's looking out over Paris and like he looks to his, looks over to his left and he sees Gusteau's restaurant there. And he had found out just before him and his clan had gotten like, mass exodus from the old woman's house that Gusteau had actually died several years ago, that he had received this very scathing food critic review from this guy named Anton Ego, and it's just scathing and like degrades his food and everything like that, and like it like caused him to lose one of his like rating stars or whatever. And I think they're supposed to be the equivalency of like a Michelin star, but like Michelin only goes up to 3, and like Gusteau had 5. So I don't know how good he did it to get to a 5-star rating, but he had amazing food. And Julia Child, that was the name of the other chef I was trying to remember. Yeah, Julia Child. He kind of has that kind of idea to him as well, of just like they love cooking and everything like that. Like and experimenting and things like that. I was trying to remember her name. Julia Childs, that's right. And of course, so many other, chefs that you want to throw in there. That are probably somewhat inspired Gusteau, or Gusteau in regards to like how they inspired the character for his designs and everything. But what we see is that Remy, the guy that's on top of the building, that's, the giant neon sign of Gusteau, he is, Remy's like imagining him talking to him, and it's just like, come inside and see and watch. And, Remy like, works his way into the building, and, he's like watching down on the chefs, and we're introduced to a bunch of the other characters in the movie. One of them is, Skinner, who is like the current kind of owner of the restaurant. He was the sous chef under Gusteau when Gusteau was alive. The thought is that like losing one of his rating stars caused Gusteau to kind of like die of heartbreak, and then after his death, it subsequently lost another star, so it sounded like a 3-star rating, which depending on what rating system you're using can still be pretty dang good food. But what ends up happening is, Skinner is like this short little guy, and like he's the one that's currently in charge of the kitchen. And then, like Remy, as he's watching through, like the top, the skylight window, he's like talking to like the imaginary Gusteau, and like Gusteau is like quizzing him on like what everybody in the kitchen is doing. And like, it's this amazing, immaculate kitchen with, stoves and ovens and everything like that. I mean, like I've been in kind of industrial kitchens before. One of my first jobs was like having to be like a server / cleaner at like a retirement home, and like we were part of the servers in and out of the kitchen all the time, and like it was just like very much the same setup as like there's the head chef, there's the stew chef, there's the other chefs that deal with other things, there's like a pastry chef, and there's like the saucier, which deals with sauces and like all this other stuff. And like Remy and Gusteau are like watching everything that's going on, and we're introduced to this the one female chef in the kitchen, whose name is Colette, and she is this very very hard-skinned, very tough-skinned, takes her job as a chef very seriously, which everybody in the kitchen takes their job as chefs very seriously, understandably so. And then we're introduced to this other character, who is the other main character of the movie, Alfredo Linguini. Alfredo sauce, linguine is a type of pasta. Just funny. It sounds a bit more like an Italian last name than a French last name, but okay, whatever. And again, both my mom and my dad's last names are German, so yeah. But what we see is, this kid comes in, and he's probably like 18, 19 years old, whatever the case may be, and he talks to Skinner, and he gives him this letter from his mother, and it's just like, she just thought that maybe it would help me get a job here, and he's basically turned into the trash boy, garbage boy, whatever. He's supposed to be like the janitor of the place. And, he's hired on, he's like working on like trying to clean and everything like that around everybody. And what ends up happening is he ends up accidentally like knocking over one of the soups, and it ends up, and then he's like very, very badly like putting any ingredients in, and it just does not go well. And like Remy is just watching this, and he's like horrified of what's going on, and he's just like, oh my god, he's ruining the soup, and like all this other stuff. And Remy is just like ends up like he's like, I want the window. Okay, fine. No. Love you. You're my baby. And what ends up happening is, of course, the dog leaves. I love you too. And what ends up happening is Remy ends up like sneaking his way into the kitchen, and there's like this whole like running around chasing all the way throughout the kitchen and everything, that he ends up all over the kitchen, under stuff, around stuff, just jumping all over the place. Even though, ends up in the oven at one point. Like, none of the chefs notice this rat running around. I'm like, you colors are very concentrated on what you're doing if you're not going to notice a rat running around. And, he ends up like dashing about and everything, and he ends up running by the soup, and he ends up getting a whiff of the soup, and he's just like, like, oh God, this is the worst thing I've ever smelled type of thing. And what ends up happening is he ends up like, keeps like there's an open window that he could very easily get to if he just went through the window, and he'd be out. But he can't resist, and he like keeps running back and like throwing other ingredients into the pot, salt, other things, just like more seasonings and spices and like whatever else he's supposed to throw in there, to get the soup to actually smell good and to like taste good. And what ends up happening is the light flips on, and we turn and we see Linguini looking at him, like seeing what what Remy had been doing. And Linguini is just like, oh no. And then, everybody sees the rat, and he traps the rat. He sees the rat, he traps Remy. And then via things that happen, the soup actually ends up getting taken out to, for someone to try, because they ordered the soup and now they get the soup. And everybody is just like freaking out, thinking that like, oh God, Linguini like destroyed the soup and everything like that. And I was just like, oh God, this is horrible. And like the lady that tried the soup actually really, 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 really likes it. And like she ends up writing like a very good, review of it, because she's a food critic. And like, Colette actually like stands up for like Linguini, so he's not like kicked out of the kitchen. And, after like Linguini's kind of quote unquote saved, quote unquote saved by Colette, that's when, like Remy gets noticed, and, they chase around, try to get the rat out of the kitchen, which, yes, rats are not supposed to be like these, they're not portrayed as these like clean creatures that you want to have in your kitchen and everything like that. And what happens is, Linguini's actually the one that catches it, and they're just like, what am I supposed to do with it? Kill it, but take it far away from here. And like he goes out, like he gets on his bike and he rides away on the bike, and like he goes to like by the river, which is, I'm assuming is supposed to be like just the Seine River, or whatever the river is that flows through Paris, one of the rivers. And he's like holding the jar out, and he's like ready to like, I'm assuming like just drop the jar into the water, so that way eventually like Remy will like either, suffocate because there's not enough air in the jar or whatever. And like he's like holding it, and he's like looking at Remy, and like he's like yelling at the rat, like, you were the one getting all fancy with the spices. And it's just like this hilarious conversation where it's just like Remy's like kind of slowly answering him, like, yes, yes, no, no, yes, yes, no, no, and what ends up happening is, because like everybody in the restaurant thinks that Linguini is the one that did stuff to the soup, so, which technically they're right, but he kind of ruined it, and then Remy fixed it. And what happens is, Remy ends up, Linguini was, kind of gets like complimented on the soup, so he's kind of possibly, has a job there as like a chef, like he's gonna get, trained in how to be a chef. But what ends up happening is like he's like, I can't cook, I don't know how to cook. And he's like, him and Remy like end up sitting like on the ledge by the river, and they're just like talking. Well, Linguini is talking, Remy is like nodding his head or shaking his head at different points in time. And what ends up happening is, Linguini and Remy end up making this like deal that it's just like, if you help me with the cooking, I won't kill you, I won't hurt you. And, Linguini like opens the jar, and like Remy like gets out, and then he like dashes off. And like Linguini is just like, well, I can't really blame him, is like the look on Linguini's face, just like, I was about to kill him, so I don't really blame him for running away. But then Remy comes back, and like, him and Linguini, like, they're like, okay, well, we're gonna do this. And like they get back to, Linguini's apartment, and like that's where they stay the night. And I think he ends up calling Remy Little Chef, which because of it's like he doesn't know Remy's real name, so he calls him Little Chef. And what ends up happening is the next morning, Linguini wakes up and he looks around and he's like, oh god, the rat's gone and like some of my food's gone, and he's just like flipping out thinking that like the rat tricked him or whatever. And then he just like turns around and he sees Remy like sitting there like having made him like an omelet. And he's like, oh, thank you. And then they like Linguini scarfs down his food, but then they have to get headed off to work. And when they get to work that day, they're trying to figure out how to make Remy and Linguini be able to work together. And it's just like, well, where can I put the rat? It's like, and it results in this funny stuff of like when Linguini is like trying to cook, Remy is like running up and down his clothes and like biting him and like clawing at him and just like all this other stuff that just like does not work well for trying to cook and not look like an insane person. And like everybody else is just like watching this. And what ends up happening is they do end up Skinner, the guy that's in charge of the restaurant, keeps stumbling upon that what he thinks is like Linguini. It was like the rat that that was supposed to be killed by Linguini, and he just keeps going slightly insane. And like Skinner has been like marketing, using different marketing and everything like that to try to use like Gusteau as a way to just like make himself more money. And he's like, has all these different brands that he's done with like Gusteau of like, all these different like marketing ideas and everything like that. Oh well. And it's just, blatant over the top marketing things. If you're a door in the background, that's my mom leaving for work. Blatant over the top marketing things and like just like degrading Gusteau's image to a degree. And what happens is, Linguini and Remy actually end up developing like this kind of puppet system where like Remy sits in like Linguini's hat underneath his hat that I do not remember like what the exact name for like the very tall chef's hat is called. I want to say it was called a tote. I don't remember. Just under the hat. And that's where like Remy is, and like he like uses like Linguini's hair as like puppetry to like Linguini move Linguini's arms and his hands and everything like that. And so it's like they're practicing at Linguini's apartment and everything to get to the point where like Remy has like control over Linguini and everything. And I was just like, there's certain times where it's just like, okay, I'm gonna trust the rat in my head. But then there's, the rat that's sitting on top of my head. And then there's other times where we're just like, pick up knife. Oh, God. And at one point, it's like Linguini is like blindfolded. So he doesn't know exactly what's going on. And it's just like, okay, we have knife. Let's not try to chop our own fingers off type of moments. And like he does get to the point where he can make the soup. And then, the soup is like a hit at the restaurant. It's like it actually getting them like rather good reviews for the soup. And what happens is Linguini kind of get, he has to have like Colette ends up getting in charge of Colette is in charge of like training, him and how to be a better cook. So we get like all these different lessons on like how to be a better cook, keep your sleeves clean, like keep them, rolled up and like next to you, and, just how to, be cautious of your surroundings and everything like that. And like all this other stuff when it comes to like cooking and everything in the kitchen. And, she's a very good chef herself. And what ends up happening is, the two of them actually, Linguini and Colette end up getting along really, really well. And he kind of like starts to fall for her. And the other thing that happens is Skinner has gotten to the point where he is like just very, very suspicious of Linguini, and he ends up reading the letter that Linguini's mother had sent with him. He explained that like she died recently, and he's like, well, she believed in heaven, so she's like covered for the whole afterlife thing. I'm like, okay, that's one way of putting it. And so, you know, Skinner like reads a letter, and according to the letter, Linguini is actually Gusto's son. And Skinner like brings in his lawyer, and he's just like, this can't be true. And like, because like if after 2 years after Gusto's death, if like no heir apparent comes forward, then everything goes to Skinner. And, you know, if Linguini is indeed Gusto's son, then he is the rightful owner of like the restaurant and everything else. And what ends up happening is, you know, that, what ends up happening is he starts trying to, you know, Skinner starts trying to like butter up. The dog came back up. Rainy. Okay, no. And what happens is, you know, Skinner starts trying to, like, one night he, like after they had a really good night, he, like, tries to get, you know, Linguini drunk to try to get him to say anything about, like, having a rat. Whether he has a rat for a pet, knows anything about rats, anything like that. And, like, that doesn't go well. But what ends up happening is, like, throughout the time frame, other people start coming into the restaurant more, and it's like gaining a bit more notoriety and everything. And like people keep wanting like different like specials made by Linguini. And, you know, so it's like actually Remy's recipes, and he's like, you know, using Linguini to cook them and everything like that. And like he gets, you know, lots of different, you know, things going, lots of different recipes going. And like Colette actually starts getting annoyed because like he, you know, like Rainy. Okay. I don't know. I thought maybe you'd come in the room. Rainy, come here. Come here. Come here. Come on, come here. Come here. I had puppy. Come on, over here. Come on, up on the bed. There we go. Now we got puppy. Okay, I gotta go back to this. And, you know, he's like having to try all these new dishes and everything like that, and like improving on like old dishes from Gusto and everything. And what ends up happening is that, you know, the night that, you know, they're getting Skinner tries to get Linguini drunk, Remy actually ends up running into his brother into Emile. And what ends up happening is, like, you know, he's like so happy to see his brother, and then like Emile and, you know, takes Remy back to where, you know, the colony is, where their father and the colony is. And, you know, they're just like, you know, working their way through all of that and having, you know, he's like so happy to see his dad and everything like that, but he's just like, but I have to go back to, like, you know, where I was. And, you know, Remy goes back to, you know, he's like, Remy is very determined to try to prove that, like, yes, rats and humans can live together. And his father is just very against it, which, you know, from his father's point of view, I can understand. And what ends up happening is Remy, you know, goes back to, you know, the restaurant that morning, or the next morning, and, you know, Skinner got Linguini very drunk, and then, you know, basically ended up making him have to stay and then, like, clean everything up, which Linguini apparently did, or clean most of it up. And what happens is, you know, he's, like, passed out cold, and Remy ends up, like, puppeteering him when, like, Colette shows up, and then, like, Colette ends up, like, slapping Linguini awake. And via thing that happens is, Remy ends up, Colette ends up getting kissed by Linguini under the control of Remy, which is just, like, whole levels of, like, that's not really consent, but okay, she apparently ends up liking it, but that doesn't mean that's right. And what ends up happening is, you know, they kind of start to have much more of a romance between the two of them. And what happens is, on Remy's side of things, Emile keeps showing up at the restaurant with like more and more rats with him, and Remy has to keep sneaking in and like bringing out more food for them. And then at one point, Remy ends up sneaking into Skinner's office in the morning to try to get the key because they put a lock on the fridge, and he like finds a file full of like stuff about like, you know, Gusteau's will, and he's like looking over the will and like looking over like the letter from Linguini's mother, and he figures out that, oh my god, Linguini is Gusteau's son, and there's like a picture of Gusteau sitting on the desk, and he's like, oh, I have a son. And I was just like, well, you didn't know? I'm a figment of your imagination. I only know what you know, type of thing. So it's just like, well, yeah, that's true. And Remy ends up like stealing the letter and like the will and everything. And there's this whole chase scene between like Skinner is like trying to chase after Remy, you know, throughout Paris to try to get the papers back, and like Remy manages to escape. And then he gets like the papers to Linguini, and Linguini is able to then like claim being Gusteau's actual son. And, you know, I guess they do like a DNA test and it proves correct. And, you know, and Linguini is then given like full, you know, ownership of the restaurant, and he moves into this much nicer apartment, and he even makes like this little tiny like, you know, window nook thing for, you know, Remy to sit on, you know, for Remy to have for like his little room. And like everybody in the you know, restaurant seems to be having a much better time, and, you know, except for Skinner, who gets fired, of course, for, you know, trying to hide all of this. And he, you know, Skinner ends up like calls like the health inspector, and he's just like, oh, well, there's like a huge rat infestation at Gusteau's. And I was just like, I'll book you in when I get the chance. Because it's just like so many other things he has to do for the health inspector. Poor health inspector. I feel sorry for the health inspector in this movie. He didn't ask for any of this. And what happens is, you know, Skinner keeps trying to figure out a way to like get rid of, you know, get payback at Linguini. And at the same time, we have Anton Ego, who is the, you know, the food critic that kind of seems to have like inadvertently caused, you know, Gusteau's death through his scathing review. And he finds out that actually Gusteau's is becoming much more popular now. And he's like, well, that can't be right. And he like, you know, like Linguini is like, when he's having this like kind of press conference-ish type thing, you know, at the restaurant, Ego, you know, Anton shows up and he like marches his way in. Well, doesn't march, but just like walks his way in, and he just like kind of like challenges Linguini, just like, I'll be here, you know, tomorrow night, and you can, you know, cook, you know, and I will try your food, and we will see whether or not you truly are the chef that you claim to be, type of thing. And then he leaves. And what ends up happening is Remy and Linguini actually end up having like kind of a fight because, you know, Remy is one that's actually been doing all the cooking, but Linguini is one that's, you know, the face of everything, and they have like this big fight about it. And what ends up happening is Linguini, or Remy, actually ends up like letting his father and his, you know, his brother and his father and the rest of their clan into the restaurant and into the food cupboard to get a bunch of the food. And Linguini actually shows up when this is happening, and he gets, you know, extremely angry at Remy, which I don't blame him, and, you know, chases out all the rats and everything. And like the day of when everything is, you know, this happens like the night before when everything is supposed to happen at the restaurant with, you know, Anton, you know, with a, you know, Ego coming in. And what ends up happening is, you know, everybody in the restaurant is like ordering, you know, nothing but like Linguini special, but like he never wrote down any of the recipes because like Remy never had him write down any recipes, which is like, you know, that's a bit of an issue on Remy's part. He probably should have been writing down the recipes, because it's like, you can't be the only one in the kitchen cooking. You know, cooking all the specialty meals. It has to be, you know, something that the other people can make too. And what ends up happening is Linguini ends up, you know, like stressing out and everything. And, like, you know, Anton shows up and he's, like, ready to, you know, order whatever it is. And he's just like, tell the chef to bring me whatever he wishes. You know, I will eat whatever he wishes me to try. And, you know, he's like, you know, he ends up having to wait a very long time. But what ends up happening is Remy actually ends up getting caught by Skinner and, like, put into a rat trap and put into Skinner's trunk because Skinner found out that Remy was actually the one that was, like, doing all the cooking and not, you know, Linguini. And, like, during this time frame, like, Remy's father and his brother show up and, like, they, like, help free Remy from, like, the trunk and the trap and everything. So it's like he's free and everything. And, like, his father is kind of, like, there to help him. And as is the rest of the clan. And what happens is, like, Remy ends up going into the kitchen and, like, all the chefs get ready to, like, stab him. And, like, they're all, like, ready to, like, attack the rat. And, you know, it's just like, you said earlier you don't want to kill a rat inside the kitchen. I'm just like, okay. And, like, Linguini, like, jumps in front of it and, like, stops the knives from, like, you know, getting to Remy. And, like, he picks up the rat and he explains to the rest of the chefs in the restaurant that, you know, this rat is actually the one that's been, like, doing all of the cooking, all those, you know, recipes and everything. It was him and, like, all this other stuff. And he's, like, explaining it to them. And, like, they're just, like, some of them are just looking at him like, he's insane. He's lost it. And I don't blame them. I would probably be having that impression as well of just, like, you're seeing this too, right? That would be my answer. And what ends up happening is Remy, you know, all the rest of the chefs actually end up leaving. And, you know, Colette is, like, the last one that leaves. And, like, she's still very, you know, upset and everything. And what happens is Remy, Linguini had, like, stood up for Remy. And, you know, like, his father saw this. You know, Remy's father and his brother saw this. And, like, they get the rest of the clan. And everybody's like, okay, so what are we going to do? And Remy's like, okay, this is what's going to happen. And, like, Linguini, you know, like, watches as, like, the rest of the rats, like, start working together. And, like, the health inspector showed up. And, like, they have to, like, the bunch of the rats, like, go after the health inspector. And there's a moment where, like, the health inspector is, like, inside of his car. And, like, all the rats are just, like, running over the hood of the car, like, covering the car. And I'm just like, oh, God, no. And I'm like, I am very reminded of the scene from Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets when all of the Accumantulas are, like, ugh. One scene in Harry Potter I cannot watch is, like, the entire scene in the forest in Goblet of Fire, because, oh, God, arachnophobia. Oh, God. I can listen to the scene fine, but I cannot watch it. Oh, God, no. With Aragog and, oh, God. And what ends up happening is, you know, the health inspector gets, you know, captured and everything. And he ends up getting, like, thrown into the cupboard where he's, like, all tied up in ropes. And I'm just like, as I said, I feel sorry for this health inspector. He did not ask for any of this. I feel so sorry for him. He's like, I get kidnapped by rats and then I'm locked in a cupboard. And it's just like, oh, God, this is not my day. It's like, no, it's not. But, like, all the rats, like, Remy has, like, all the rats, like, kind of go through, like, the cleaning process. Like, you know, all employees must wash hands, so they all get kind of, like, steam cleaned real quick to, you know, like, the dish cleaner, so that way they can all start cleaning. Like, Remy's, like, ordering them all around. There's, like, you're doing this, you're doing that, you're doing that. Like, they're all very well organized, because they've all been, like, trained by Remy's dad. And, like, they're all set and ready. And what happens is, you know, Linguini comes out and he, like, sees what they're doing, and he's just like, okay, well, you're gonna need someone to wait tables. So he's, like, putting on his roller skates and, like, gotten like a you know, a waiter suit on, and he's, like, running out and, like, you know, getting everybody, like, their menus and, like, they're, you know, keeping everybody's drinks where they're supposed to be and everything like that, and just, like, dashing all about. And, you know, Skinner has, like, snuck his way into the restaurant and he's, like, ready to, you know, I guess, like, expose them or whatever, see what happens with Anton there. And, you know, Colette is, like, you know, riding her bike, because she rides a motorcycle because she's awesome. And she, like, rides by a, you know, like, a bookstore, and she sees in the bookstore the, you know, Gusto's book of, you know, anyone can cook. And she's like, she, like, turns around on the bike and gets back to the restaurant, and she gets inside, she, like, looks at she, like, sees all the rats cooking, and I'm just like, she's just like, oh, God. I'm like, yeah, no, I would have that reaction too if I walked into a kitchen and saw a bunch of rats cooking. No. And what happens is, Linguini shows up and she's like, just don't say anything. I may change my mind. And she's like, okay, what do you want me to do? And, he's like, well, we need to cook something for Anton. And she like looks at Remy and she's like, well, what are we going to make for him? And like Remy shows her the recipe for Ratatouille. And she's like, this is a peasant dish. Why would we make it? And Remy is just like, this is what we're going to do. And, we see like Remy and her like kind of cooking together. And she's like, well, what would you do with it? Like, I guess he like comes up with like a slightly new adjustment on like how to cook it. And like they cook the meal and everything, and like Anton's still sitting out there along with everybody else who's like getting all their food from the rats and everything. And they make the whole ratatouille thing for him, and they take the food out to Anton, and they serve it to Anton. And Anton's like been sitting there the whole time, like he's got like his pen and his paper ready to write his like scathing review, all the notes about the scathing review for the restaurant and everything, because he's just like so certain that, oh no, it can't be as good as everybody says. And he takes one bite of the ratatouille, and we see like the pen drop from his hand, and like we see him get like transported back in time to when he's like this little kid, and his mom is the one cooking for him, and she made him ratatouille, and he's just like brought back to that moment, and he just like scarfs down the rest of the little bit of the ratatouille, and like Skinner is like off to the side watching this, and he's just like, what the, because he like ordered the same thing, and he's just like, this is impossible. And he like runs into the kitchen, and he's just like, I demand to see the chef. And there's just like rats everywhere, and like a bunch of the rats, she's like just like tackle him, and like they get tied up as well, like throw it into like with the health inspector. So that's just funny too. And what happens is Rainy's like, eyes will has window, eyes has curtain as hat. Oh, stop it, I'm almost done. And what ends up happening is Anton ends up telling, it's not very often that I have the waiter give my compliments to the chef. And now I have my waiter as my chef. My chef is my waiter or whatever. And he's just like, well, I'm not actually the one that cooked it. And he goes in and he brings out Colette. And like, he's like, so you must be the one. And she's like, if you wish to speak to the chef, you'll have to wait until everybody else is gone. And he's like, okay. And I'm assuming they probably maybe give him something else to eat in that time frame. But he waits and waits and waits until everybody else is gone. And then Colette and, Linguini bring out Remy, and like they explain that, like Anton is like listening, occasionally asking a couple of questions for clarification. And like they go into the kitchen, like he sees all the rats cooking and like cleaning everything up, and he sees like Remy like make the ratatouille again, and tries it to prove that it's the same ratatouille. And like he's just like, he gets up and he leaves, not like angry or anything like that, and he just leaves. And like the next day, his review of the restaurant comes out, and it's just like, he's very, it's just like, it's this great speech that they have in the movie for like when he's like typing it out, and he's just like, it's just like, of all the, food and everything like that. And it's just like, he realizes that what Gusteau had meant by anyone can cook was not that like, oh, anyone in the world can cook. It's the fact that great chefs can come from anywhere is what he meant. And he he says that, Remy is like nothing less than the finest chef in France. And like, it's this amazing review. And then, of course, like, they have to let, like, Skinner and the health inspector go. And that's just, like, now Gusteau's is actually closed down now because, rats in the kitchen. And, Remy is, like he still has a good relationship with his dad and his brother and the rest of the clan, and like him, and he's still like the little chef for Linguini and Colette, because she's like accepted it now. And like we cut to, I had a little bit in time, and uh you know they end up founding a restaurant that is called Le Ratatouille, which has like a little rat as like the poster thing, rat as a chef as the poster. And Anton Ego is actually one of their biggest investors in the business and everything, and like he loves coming there to eat and everything, and loves giving wonderful compliments to Remy. And like they did like a redesign in like this kitchen in the back that like allows Remy to like be able to like run around the kitchen so much easier. And like Colette is there, and like Linguini is kind of the waiter, and so we get like all this other stuff, and like all the rats actually have like a little restaurant like above the restaurant, so like they're able to eat there too. Like his father and his brother are there and everything, and it's like everybody is so much happier. And Anton has like a love for food back, as opposed to just like critiquing everything that he tries. And like Colette and Linguini are like a happy couple and everything, so it's just like I love how they did that. In regards to cast for the movie, we of course have Patton Oswalt as Remy. He's also been in a couple of other Disney things at this point in time. He was on Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. as, I think, a couple of episodes as like just one of the other secret agents. I think he died, if I remember correctly. And he is also Pip in Marvel in the MCU now as well, thanks to Eternals. And then we have Lou Romano as Alfredo Linguini, so as Linguini. We have, and some of these names I'm probably going to mispronounce, and I apologize. We have Janine Garofalo as Colette. We have Ian Holm as Skinner. We have Peter O'Toole, amazing Peter O'Toole, as Anton Ego. We have Brad Garrett as Augustin Gusteau. We have Brian Dene as Django, as Remy's father. We have Peter Son as Emile. Several of the other chefs and everything, like they go through some of the other chefs, like their backstories, and like some of them are a little bit darker backstories than you expect in a Pixar movie, but it's like they're all chefs, and they very much go to the very concept of like anyone can cook that Gusteau goes with, so that it's like they're all chefs, and that's what matters. And then of course we have John Ratzenberger, obligatory John Ratzenberger, as Mustafa, who I think he's like the waiter or something like that for the restaurant, if I remember correctly. And then of course for extras in regards to this, one of the extras on it is a Pixar shirt called Your Friend the Rat, that is actually stars Remy and Emile, and it actually is like this short thing where they kind of go through like the actual history of the rat, and like the black rat and the plague, and then like the Norway rat, like all this other stuff, and like good things that rats have done and the bad things, and like all this other stuff and everything. Like if you it's like all humans should like be able to live in harmony with rats, but that's not going to happen. And then there are two other things. One is Once Upon a Time. There is a Ratatouille reference in Once Upon a Time. In the 7th season, there is a character hired by Victoria Belfray, who's like the well, technically she's Rapunzel, but she's also Cinderella's stepmother, and she's supposed to the rat, he's a human that's been turned into, or a rat that's been turned into a human and everything. And, he's supposed to like be around some of the other, humans and like spy for her or whatever. I don't remember exactly, but like, he's supposed to be a reference there. And then in Kingdom Hearts, so I get to talk a little bit about Kingdom Hearts for a second. In Kingdom Hearts 3, which they just announced that there's going to be a Kingdom Hearts 4, and I'm just like, yay! I have no idea what I'm going to play, but yay! Love Kingdom Hearts. In Kingdom Hearts 3, there's a place in Kingdom Hearts that is called Twilight Town, and Sora, Donald, and Goofy end up there multiple times throughout the whole story of Kingdom Hearts. and Scrooge McDuck is there, and he actually owns like this restaurant, this bistro, and he has this little chef that is actually Remy, as you know, the rat. And he one of the side games in it that I never got very far in is like you actually are like in the kitchen and you have like Remy on your head and like you're Sora and like Remy's on your head and like he's like directing you in how to cook. And I never got very good at the side game. I'm like, one of the things is like if you master like the side game, then you like get like another Keyblade. But I'm just like no, I'm not good at this side game. Some of the side games in Kingdom Hearts I'm not good at. Like the driving games, I am horrible at the driving games in Kingdom Hearts. It takes me so long to even win the driving games. It's not even funny. So I'm like, unless it's an absolute necessity for the story, I don't usually tend to do the side games. But like, so we have like Remy there. So I do like what they did with that. It's just this adorable little thing that they did with Remy in Kingdom Hearts 3. Just like throw him in there. He's not like a huge integral plot to the story, but he's just there. Like, you know, McDuck calls him, you know, little chef and everything like that, as opposed to Remy, and it's just adorable. So that's what I have for Ratatouille. I think the next one that should be coming out for chronological order for release should be I believe it's supposed to be WALL-E, because I think I got WALL-E and like Ratatouille mixed up when I was like arranging stuff, but it should be WALL-E that's next, I believe. So that's what we have. I thank you very much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed the video, and I hope that you have a nice rest of your day. Bye. This is me. I think it's apparent that I need to rethink my life a little bit. What's my problem? First of all, I'm a rat, which means life is hard. And second, I have a highly developed sense of taste and smell.